London, summer of 1992. On one warm July morning, a young mother set out for a walk to the city park with her little son. Wanting to avoid the midday heat, they purposely headed out early. Enjoying the morning coolness, they peacefully strolled along a cozy park path beside a stream. But suddenly their idyll was shattered by the appearance of a stranger. This was Rachel Nickell, a native of London, born in 1968. An attractive and gifted girl, she dreamed of a modeling career from a young age and, thanks to her persistence and excellent looks, achieved that goal. At age 20, she was already participating in London Fashion Week, although her success on the runway proved short-lived. In 1989, Rachel met a Spaniard named Andre, and soon became pregnant. Realizing her situation, she understood that she would have to forget about her modeling career for at least a few years. In 1990, their son Alexander was born. The parents weren't in a hurry to formalize their relationship officially, but they lived in harmony. Andre had a good income, so Rachel could afford not to go to work. She fully devoted herself to motherhood and housekeeping. The family settled in a cozy apartment in southwest London, near Wimbledon Common Park. They even got a dog named Molly and enjoyed a quiet family life. The morning of July 15, 1992 was sunny and windless. Forecasters promised real heat. So 23-year-old Rachel went for her daily walk earlier than usual. Taking 2-year-old Alexander and faithful Molly with her, they headed to the park to get some fresh air. Wimbledon Common is a sizable green space, about 4 square kilometers in area. In summer, during vacation season, it gets quite crowded, but in the morning the park was nearly empty. I remember the bright sunlight and pleasant warmth. The park was bursting with flowers and greenery, Molly happily running in the grass, the adult Alexander later recalled. Unfortunately, what should have been a pleasant family outing instantly turned into a horrible tragedy that traumatized the boy for life. According to Alexander, a man suddenly jumped out of the bushes with a large black bag over his shoulder. He rushed towards them with a knife in his hand. Alexander was shoved and fell, and a moment later his mother collapsed on the ground next to him. The park gradually filled with people, but the mother and son were found only an hour and a half later. Around 10:30 a.m., passers-by saw the toddler crying bitterly, clinging to his mother's motionless body. "Mommy, wake up! Mommy, why won't you get up?" the boy sobbed. One look was enough to understand that the son would not get an answer from his mother. The woman's clothes were stained with something red. Completing the gruesome picture was a paper receipt from a store lying on her forehead. As it turned out later, Alexander himself had put it there. The day before, Rachel had told him about bandages, and the toddler thought he could help his mom with this band-aid. Even seasoned detectives were stunned by the brutality of the crime. Rachel was attacked in a deserted spot near the stream. She was stabbed 49 times in the neck and torso and subjected to sexual assault. It was shocking that such a monstrous crime occurred in broad daylight in a public place. Initially, investigators assumed that the attacker knew the victim and acted according to a plan. But it quickly became clear this was not the case. First, Rachel usually walked in the park at a different time. Second, the police could not find a single suspect among her acquaintances. The young woman lived a quiet, orderly life, devoted mainly to raising her son. Her common-law husband had a wonderful relationship with her. Although Rachel hadn't appeared on the runway for several years, she remained very attractive and drew men's attention. Perhaps one of her fans felt spurned and decided to take revenge? The only lead for the investigation was the perpetrator's genetic material found at the scene of the tragedy. Experts were able to compile his DNA profile, but in the early 90s the database was nearly empty and cross-referencing yielded no results. Law enforcement interviewed about 500 potential witnesses who were in the park between 9 and 11 a.m. But only one of them provided important information. Around 9:30, he noticed a suspicious man washing his hands in the stream and then wiping his jacket. Slung over his shoulder was the same black bag that Alexander remembered. Thanks to this testimony, the police made a composite sketch: a young man, about 180 centimeters tall, with short brown hair. However, despite the stranger's odd behavior, there were insufficient grounds to link him to the crime. In fact, the only direct witness to the tragedy was 2-year-old Alexander, who, due to his age, could not provide the investigation with any useful information. However, after the high-profile murder, journalists showed increased interest in the boy, even trying to interview him on the playground. Rachel's common-law husband, Andre, had a cast-iron alibi. At the time of the crime, he was at work. After the tragedy, he decided to leave the country and return with his son to his homeland, Spain. Several months passed, and investigators managed to narrow the circle of suspects. Suspicion fell on 26-year-old Colin Stagg, a resident of southwest London, who was often seen walking his dog in Wimbledon Common Park. That fateful morning, Colin woke up around 8:30 with a terrible headache. He decided that a walk with his dog in the park would cheer him up. But he didn't feel better, so instead of going to work, the man returned home and went back to bed. Waking up a few hours later, he again set off to the park with his dog. To his great surprise, the place he had passed by in the morning was now surrounded by police. Colin honestly admitted to the officer that he had walked along that path around 9 in the morning but hadn't noticed anything suspicious. Stagg could have been forgotten about, if not for one incident from his past. Colin had once been fined £200 for indecent behavior in the park, namely for being caught there without clothes. So now he was back in the police's sights. Despite the complete lack of physical evidence linking Colin Stagg to the murder of Rachel Nickell, he became the focus of the investigation. The famous criminal psychologist Paul Britton was even brought in to compile a psychological profile of the killer. In his report, Britton suggested that the criminal most likely did not know the victim personally, but chose her at random while hiding in the bushes near the path. According to his assessment, the killer was likely to be between 20 and 35 years old, modest and unsociable, with difficulties in communication, especially with women. It's unlikely he has a wife or steady girlfriend willing to indulge his unusual fantasies. It was this that pushed him to commit the crime: unrealized desires and suffering from loneliness, the psychologist wrote. Police compared the profile compiled by Britton with Colin Stagg's personality. Much of it matched: age, lack of serious relationships, living near the park, and daily walks with his dog. But this circumstantial evidence was insufficient for an arrest. To obtain more compelling evidence, Colin was called in for questioning. While talking to detectives, Stagg admitted that he had seen Rachel in the park once. He liked her, so he remembered her face. Colin also said that he had never had a long-term relationship, and this was a painful subject for him. These confessions only heightened the investigators' suspicions, but still did not give them legal grounds to charge Stagg. So the detectives decided to lure him into a trap. A special operation called Ineus was devised. The key role was given to a female police officer, Lizzie James, who worked undercover. Her task was to get close to Stagg, gain his trust, and get him to confess to the crime against Rachel Nickell. Lizzie constantly consulted with a criminal psychologist, who advised her on tactics for communicating with the suspect. For 5 months, Lizzie developed a relationship with the unsuspecting Colin. They went on dates, talked on the phone, and corresponded. The woman hinted at her interest in the occult and unusual experiments. In one of her letters, she directly asked Colin if he wanted to act out any of his fantasies. He replied in the affirmative and even shared some frightening and cruel ideas. However, no matter how much Lizzie tried to extract information from him about the crime in the park, Stagg evaded answering. Finally, the female police officer took a desperate step. During a personal meeting, she promised Colin in exchange for confessing to the murder of Rachel Nickell. "I'm very sorry, but I didn't do it. I didn't cause Rachel any harm," was Stagg's categorical response. Despite this, as well as the lack of reliable evidence, Colin Stagg was arrested in 1993. Police had recordings of phone conversations where he told Lizzie that he enjoyed causing pain to others. Moreover, while discussing the park tragedy, Colin described in detail the place by the stream where the murder took place, providing details known only to the real killer. The trial began in September 1994. In protest against the unfounded accusations, Colin went on a hunger strike. During the hearings, he was exhausted and had lost a lot of weight. In his speech, Stagg stated, "Most of what I wrote and told Lizzie is untrue. I made up a lot because I liked her, and I didn't want to disappoint the only woman who, I thought, was genuinely interested in me. In reality, I don't enjoy cruel things and have never done anything like that. And I'm certainly not capable of what happened to Rachel Nickell." After hearing the arguments of the prosecution and defense, the judge concluded that the police had acted too zealously in trying to beat a confession out of Stagg using dubious methods. The court ruled that Colin Stagg was not involved in the park tragedy, and he was released right in the courtroom. In 2002, a decade after the tragic events, Scotland Yard's investigative team reopened the case. But the real breakthrough came only 4 years later, when the DNA sample found at the crime scene was finally identified. The genetic material belonged to a convicted killer named Robert Napper. By the time officers tracked down Robert Napper in 2006, he was already 40. The man had serious mental disorders, paranoid schizophrenia and autism spectrum disorders. For more than 10 years he had been held in a secure psychiatric facility. Back in November 1993, Napper had been convicted of murdering 27-year-old Samantha Bissett and her young daughter Jasmine. As it turned out, before the attack, Robert had been stalking Samantha for several weeks. He was especially attracted to peeping through windows at her life. Napper memorized the poses and movements in which Samantha made love with her partner. And then one night, having waited for the right moment, he broke into the woman's house through the balcony doors, which were almost never locked. Without going into the grisly details of the crime, I'll just say that Samantha and Jasmine endured real torture. At the end, Robert placed Samantha's body in the pose he had most often seen during her lovemaking with her husband. Even seasoned officers, examining the crime scene, could not restrain their emotions and needed the help of a psychologist. They had not yet encountered such shocking cruelty. The murder of Samantha and her daughter occurred 16 months after the attack on model Rachel Nickell. Robert Napper was born in 1966 in London. His father was a driving instructor, and his mother was a caregiver in a nursing home. Conflicts often arose in the family in front of the children. In addition to Robert, the couple had 2 younger sons and a daughter. When the boy was 9, his father left the family and went to Australia, where he got a job as a firefighter. Robert took the separation very hard. He wrote letters to his father, but after a while, contact between them broke off. According to his father's recollections, as a child, Robert was a very sweet boy, and nothing foreshadowed that he would be capable of terrible acts in the future. At school, Napper had almost no friends and always kept to himself. He was very withdrawn and passionate about astronomy. Classmates recalled that Robert seemed to live in his own world. His mother told how he would eavesdrop on her conversations with relatives, hiding behind doors, and then run out and accuse everyone of gossiping about him. The boy behaved aggressively, often lied, and fought with his brothers. Robert loved to spy on his sister when she was taking a shower or changing clothes in her room. Sometimes he would throw back the covers from the sleeping girl and stare at her body for hours. His mother noticed her son's strange behavior and suspected that something was wrong with his mind. At the age of 11, at his mother's insistence, Robert underwent a psychiatric evaluation. After the very first session, he came home and announced with a smile, "The doctor thinks I'm crazy." Napper was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome and prescribed appropriate treatment. The following year, 12-year-old Robert became a victim of He was walking in the park with 2 younger friends when an unknown man attacked them and forced the boys to have This incident happened very close to Napper's house. Psychologists believe that it was then that a turning point occurred, after which Robert himself began to resort to. A teacher recalled how, after this incident, the boy changed dramatically, lost the ability to show emotions and feelings, and turned into a soulless robot. Napper just sat at his desk, mechanically did his assignments, and went home without showing any emotion. Once in literature class, students were played an audio recording of a story from the Victorian era, which was about a murder. While listening to the story, Robert turned terribly pale, began to shake, and broke out in a cold sweat. The teacher suspected an epileptic seizure, but soon it passed. On one occasion, Robert stole money from his uncle. His mother turned to the police, asking them to take her son to the station, fingerprint him, and have a preventive talk with him as if he were a criminal. She hoped that this would frighten the boy and force him to come to his senses. But she was mistaken. Neighbors and acquaintances considered Robert a sweet and quite normal teenager. But behind closed doors, he was completely different. Napper had average mental abilities and showed no inclination for physical labor. At the age of 16, Robert dropped out of school, acquired basic skills in catering, and got a job as a laborer. He constantly changed jobs, never staying anywhere for long. There were periods when he would idle for months, not leaving his room. Meanwhile, his mother remarried. From the very beginning, Robert disliked his stepfather, provoked conflicts, and even refused to talk to him. By the age of 18, his behavior had become so unbearable that I simply told him, "You have to leave my house." Robert left, and for 5 whole years I didn't see my son, his mother recalled. Their next meeting took place only in 1989. At that time, Robert was renting a shabby room in South London. During the conversation, he confessed to his mother that 2 months earlier he had a girl in the park. The woman did not know whether to believe her son's words or take it as a bad joke. She contacted Robert's psychiatrist and also reported the incident to the police. Law enforcement conducted an investigation but found no record of at park. Strangely, the officers did not even try to interrogate Napper himself or at least talk to him. If they had taken a sample of his DNA then, the Nickell case could have been solved much earlier. At about 20 years of age, Robert was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, which was rapidly progressing. He sincerely believed that he was an outstanding mathematician and even a Nobel laureate. Napper was convinced that he had access to some kind of superpowers, enormous wealth, and the ability to communicate telepathically. It seemed to him that he was invulnerable to justice. Of course, all this was nothing more than the product of his sick imagination. Robert's first known victim was a 31-year-old young mother sunbathing in a swimsuit in her own garden. After the attack, mockingly advised her, "Never leave the back door unlocked." This happened in 1989. Over the next 2 years, Napper honed his criminal craft, following a clear pattern. Detectives could not track him down. As a rule, he hunted for victims in deserted corners of the park. The attacker chose young and attractive women, mostly blondes. It is noteworthy that the site of several attacks was the same place where Robert himself had been subjected to at the age of 12. According to police estimates, between 1989 and 1993, Napper committed at least 90 attacks on women. Despite his short stature, he was in excellent physical shape. Robert always carried a knife and rope with him, although he did not always use them. At home he kept a gun. With each subsequent crime, Napper became more brutal and sadistic in his actions. After the murder of Samantha Bissett and her daughter Jasmine, Robert's fingerprint was found in their home. This helped track down the criminal, who at the time was working as a loader. In May 1994, 28-year-old Napper was detained and convicted a year later. However, he was found not guilty by reason of insanity and sent not to prison, but to a high-security psychiatric clinic. It later emerged that during the investigation into the murder of Nickell, Napper had come to the attention of detectives as a potential suspect, but due to his short stature, he was quickly excluded from the list, since a witness had seen a tall man in the park. Important detail: at the time of the search for Rachel's killer, Robert Napper was already in a psychiatric hospital behind bars. It was there that a detective interrogated him. The criminal confessed and provided such details that only the real killer could know. Since Napper was already serving a life sentence in a psychiatric clinic, the case of Rachel Nickell's murder was simply closed without a separate verdict. The court found Robert a danger to society and ordered that he be kept in a closed medical facility for the rest of his life. Andre, Rachel's common-law husband, initially thought about returning from Spain to England, but eventually decided to stay in his homeland. A few years later, he married, giving Alexander a stepmother and stepsisters. The adult Alexander once said in an interview, "Journalists predicted various horrors for me. They said I would withdraw into myself, go crazy, become a tramp, and even follow in Napper's footsteps. Fortunately, they were all wrong. Thanks to the support of my father and relatives, I found my path in life." According to him, memories of that tragic day in the London park were forever etched in his memory. To cope with the psychological trauma, Alexander took up meditation and later became a yoga instructor. He wrote a book about his mother and the difficult life he had to live. This book helped him accept the past and even forgive Robert Napper. Colin Stagg, who was once groundlessly accused of murdering Rachel Nickell, went to court demanding compensation for the suffering he endured. He won the case and received compensation in the amount of £700,000 sterling. Marco Marialini, an Italian by origin, had an obsessive fixation. In his opinion, the ideal weight for a woman should be 33 kilograms, 72.7 pounds. This unhealthy obsession transformed this seemingly respectable antique shop owner into a real monster. Marialini was born on April 13, 1959, in the small Italian city of Brescia. His father was a simple construction worker, and his mother dedicated herself to housekeeping. The woman suffered from some form of obsessive-compulsive disorder, manifesting in an excessive desire for cleanliness and order. Every item in the house had its clearly defined place, and the slightest mess could drive her to a nervous breakdown. When the Marialini couple, who were already raising a 2-year-old daughter, had a son named Marco, his mother completely lost the ability to maintain perfect order. She began to suffer from frequent hysterics but never sought medical help, as she didn't even suspect she had any mental issues. A month after little Marco was born, he was sent to live with his paternal grandparents. He stayed there for 2 years, and then his parents took him back, believing their life was back on track and all difficulties were behind them. The mother started taking care of her son, but Marco was not easy to handle. He constantly misbehaved, disobeyed, threw tantrums. The mother desperately tried to calm him down, and when it didn't work, she raised her hand against her son. The boy's father sometimes tried to intervene, but the mother silenced him too. Marco's father was a calm, submissive man who didn't dare argue with his domineering wife so as not to irritate her further. He endured and kept silent. Once, a terrible incident occurred in the Marialini family. The mother once again could not pacify Marco, who was throwing a tantrum for no reason. Then she grabbed him and threw him out the open window. The boy fell several floors and miraculously caught onto a clothesline. This saved his life. As Marco grew up, he developed a slight excess weight. He didn't go on diets or try to lose weight but felt uncomfortable in his chubby body. In his teens, the young man began to pay attention to girls. Even then, he singled out from his environment, whether at school or in groups, particularly slender figures. Even while in prison, Marco felt an attraction only to very thin women. In his head, a delusional idea formed that the ideal weight for a girl should be 33 kilograms. Once he confessed to a friend that any woman who weighs even slightly more disgusts him. Moreover, Marco wanted his chosen one to have the same strong sex drive as he did. Finding such an ideal partner turned out to be very difficult. Most girls seemed to him either too plump or not passionate enough. It was because of these inflated requirements that Marco couldn't find a partner for a long time and remained a virgin until the age of 19, until he met Lucia. Marco and Lucia met in 1978. The girl was short and weighed 45 kilograms. The young man fell in love with the petite Lucia and craved intimacy with her. But when she undressed in front of him for the first time, Marco immediately declared he was disappointed with her figure. He expected Lucia to be even slimmer under her clothes. However, this did not stop him from continuing the relationship with the girl, who was quiet, modest, and calm. Meanwhile, Marco continued to look around, searching for his ideal. A few months after starting a romance with Lucia, Marco was drafted into the army. He served in the city of Pisa. The young man hoped that in a new place it would be easier for him to find a new love, so he stopped communicating with Lucia. However, a couple of months later, when the girl found another admirer, Marco realized he did not want to lose her. He resumed the relationship and even proposed to Lucia. Later, Marialini admitted he decided to get married only because his chosen one had a weak character. He was confident he could completely mold his wife to his liking. The couple's wedding took place in 1980. Immediately after the marriage, Marco set about re-educating his wife's figure. He believed 45 kilograms was far too much for a woman. Lucia obediently agreed to go on a diet. Marco began to severely restrict her food intake and regularly weighed her. If the number decreased, the man praised Lucia and assured her of his love. But if the weight increased even slightly, Marco became unbearably cruel. After a few months of grueling dieting, Lucia reached the desired 33 kilograms. Marco was over the moon with happiness. But soon the unthinkable happened. At such a critically low weight, Lucia became pregnant. Marialini was forced to come to terms with the situation and allowed his wife to eat to her heart's content. He understood that now the woman could not be restricted in her nutrition. Lucia's body began to change rapidly, and her belly grew. Marco was extremely dissatisfied with such metamorphoses. The marital bed was practically empty. During this period, Marialini began to have erotic dreams featuring incredibly thin, skeletal, naked women. Through their translucent skin, one could see every vein and even arteries. Marco's most cherished desire was to see his beloved spine through her belly. He understood this was physically impossible but could do nothing about his obsession. In the last months of Lucia's pregnancy, Marco began actively meeting and dating other girls. This time, he deliberately sought out not just slim women, but those suffering from anorexia. However, very soon Marialini became disillusioned with his choice. In his opinion, anorexic girls had an extremely unpleasant character. And most importantly, they had no desire for intimacy. Moreover, these girls independently decided when and what to eat. For Marco, it was fundamentally important that he completely controlled his chosen one's nutrition. He dreamed that women would lose weight solely for him. Lucia first gave birth to a daughter in 1981, and a year later, the couple had another child. During this time, the woman managed to gain a lot of excess weight. Marco became even more distant from his wife, whose body after childbirth evoked only disgust in him. The man and woman no longer slept together. Marco once again forced Lucia to go on a strict diet. Although, sometimes Marialini's mind seemed to clear, and he understood the abnormality of his behavior. So that his children would not lose their mother, Marco finally decided on a divorce. The couple's parting was quiet and peaceful, without unnecessary scandals. But Marco was not going to give up his obsession, so he continued his search for a new life partner. This turned out to be not so simple, as the search for the perfect woman stretched out for almost a whole decade. During this time, Marialini managed to open his own antique store in his native Brescia and even gained some popularity among the townspeople. It was then, in 1994, that dating through newspaper ads began to gain popularity in Italy. 35-year-old Marco placed a short message in a local publication stating that he was looking for a very thin woman without anorexia, aged 18 to 50. 21 women responded to his ad. Marialini invited 13 candidates on a date, of which the student Monica impressed him the most. Monica Colorado was 25, which made her exactly a decade younger than Marco. The girl was originally from Sicily and studied speech therapy at university. With a height of 172 centimeters, she weighed only 45 kilograms. Monica was cheerful and sociable but lacked self-confidence at the same time. The girl was intrigued by Marco's unusual ad, so she decided to respond to it. A relationship started between Monica and Marco. They began to regularly meet and spend time together. The girl did not take this romance too seriously, but the man, on the contrary, wanted more. He persuaded Monica to move in with him, but she refused. Then Marco began to put psychological pressure on her, manipulating the girl's feelings. Eventually, Monica gave in and moved in with Marialini. It was then that Marco started having problems with his business. The antique shop became unprofitable, and the man got into debt. Monica helped him financially by lending him 76 million lire, money she earned from selling her own house. At that time, the amount was considerable, as the average salary in Italy was about 2 million lire. Marco proposed to Monica, but she refused. At first, they lived like an ordinary couple, but very soon, the man demanded that the girl go on a diet. He understood that with a height of 172 centimeters, Monica could never lose weight to the desired 33 kilograms. Therefore, Marialini set another goal for her, 38 kilograms. The girl reluctantly agreed to her partner's conditions, although Marco himself still dreamed of the magic number 33 deep down. It remains a mystery why he became so attached to this particular number, but perhaps it's very banal. Christ lived for that many years. Monica was on a strict diet set by Marco. The girl was allowed to eat only once a day, and usually, her meal consisted of a green salad or a few vegetables. Marialini carefully controlled the amount of food in the house. He even made special marks on cereal boxes to immediately notice if Monica decided to snack behind his back. The man weighed his partner several times a day and flew into a rage if the dial showed even a significant plus. In such cases, Marco forced the girl to induce vomiting and sometimes even raised his hand against her as punishment. However, on weekends, the couple often dined at a restaurant. There, Marco allowed himself to eat full meals. He ordered a first course, a second course, and did not even deny himself dessert. Monica, regardless of the occasion or holiday, could only choose between two options: a vegetable salad without dressing or green tea without sugar. After just a couple of months of such a strict diet, the girl reached the figure on the scales that Marco had dreamed of. However, after that, there began constant swings of body weight either to 39 or 40 kilograms. If in the morning the scales showed the number 3 in front, Marialini generously praised Monica, but if the arrow stopped at 4 at least once, the man immediately flew into a rage. Monica didn't tell anyone about her dietary restrictions, neither her parents nor her friends. When the girl noticeably lost weight, her loved ones began to worry about her health, but to all questions, Monica gave evasive answers, changed the subject, and then completely withdrew into herself. She almost stopped communicating with friends and didn't answer phone calls, just to avoid unpleasant interrogations. Over time, the girl's well-being steadily deteriorated. She constantly felt weak and didn't have the strength to even get out of bed. Monica's menstruation disappeared, and hunger became her constant companion. Thoughts of food never left her for a moment. Eventually, the girl began to secretly steal food. She greedily devoured inconspicuous tiny crackers, the number of which Marco never checked, and once even ate an onion, raw and bitter. When the owner noticed the disappearance of food, Monica had a hard time. The man brutally punished her with beatings, humiliated her, forced her to be and sometimes made her sleep on the bare floor. After 2 years of such a toxic cohabitation, the girl was so exhausted that she didn't always realize what was happening to her. However, sometimes her mind cleared, and in one of those moments, Monica firmly decided she had to escape from Marialini's house. The girl told her tormentor that she wanted to break up with him and return to her parents. To this, Marco replied with a terrifying threat: he would let Monica go only when she killed him, and if the girl dared to run away, he would cruelly take revenge on her. In the spring of 1996, Marco and Monica went to a restaurant. The man ordered a tasty and hearty pasta gnocchi, potato dumplings with flour and egg, served with cheese, mushrooms, and herbs. Monica, as always, asked for only a vegetable salad without oil and spices. When the waiter took the order, the couple began to wait for their dishes. At some point, Marco announced that he needed to go to the restroom and left Monica at the table. Soon the waiter brought the food, and then something incredible happened. The girl staged a real rebellion. She took Marco's plate with appetizing gnocchi and began to greedily shove them into her mouth. Even despite the terrible pain in her stomach, which had completely lost the habit of such generous portions, Monica could not stop. When Marco returned and saw what his companion was doing, he went berserk. The man forcibly snatched the plate from her hands and barked at Monica to calm down immediately. But the girl could no longer be stopped. She rushed to the restaurant kitchen. Monica burst into the realm of cooks and waiters, grabbed the first plate of ready-made food, and began to stuff the food into her mouth with her hands. Marco caught up with the mad woman right in the kitchen and forcibly led her to their table. The man yelled at Monica, and when they sat down at the table, he slapped her on the cheek with all his heart. The establishment's employees and visitors watched this strange performance in shock, not daring to intervene or even comment loudly on what they saw. Returning home, Marco decided to punish Monica for her restaurant antics. He forced the girl to undress and sleep on the cold floor. And he went to the bedroom, where he quickly fell asleep in a warm bed. However, Monica was not going to give up so easily. She took a heavy hammer, crept up to Marco, and hit him on the head, then rushed to escape from the house. When Marco regained consciousness a few hours later, he felt a severe headache. Next to him lay a hammer, the pillow was bloody, and Monica was nowhere to be seen. The man ran to the neighbors and asked them to call an ambulance. The medics hospitalized Marialini, but he got off with only a slight fright, so he was discharged from the hospital quite quickly. Meanwhile, the police found the fugitive Monica. The girl was arrested and taken into custody. During the interrogation, Marco stood up for his partner. He sincerely told the investigators how cruelly he treated Monica, forcing her to starve and controlling her every step. "I'm not offended by her at all. We just had a little misunderstanding, but we will definitely work it out," Marialini stated in court. As a result, Monica was found guilty but sentenced not to imprisonment, but only to 2 years of house arrest. The girl went to serve her sentence in her hometown of Domodossola, located 200 kilometers from Brescia, where Marco lived. For 2 years, Monica had to stay within her own grounds, but she was not forbidden to communicate by phone. The girl never once tried to contact her tormentor, but Marco called her with stunning regularity. At first, he was surprisingly amiable, inquiring about Monica's affairs, her well-being, and the books she read. But later, calls from Marialini began to come too often. In one of the conversations, the man confessed that he missed his beloved terribly and begged her for a meeting. Monica politely but firmly refused Marco. However, he did not calm down and continued to insist. In the end, he found his last and most important, as it seemed to him, argument. Marialini threatened to commit suicide if Monica did not agree to a date. Unfortunately, the girl did not have the emotional strength to end this sick relationship once and for all. "Okay, I will meet with you as soon as my house arrest is over," she replied to her former torturer. While Monica was serving her sentence, Marco devoted his time to creativity. In 1997, the man wrote and published his first book, which he called The Anorexia Hunter. Marialini designed the initial cover for the publication himself. It featured an extremely muscular man holding a thin, fragile woman over his head. Marco borrowed these images from the American cartoon Popeye the Sailor. However, the publisher forbade him from using borrowed pictures without the permission of the copyright holders. Therefore, the book was published with a different cover. Marialini did not hide at all that he had written an autobiographical novel that recreates the events of his own life. The man sincerely confessed that from childhood he suffered from a lack of love and care, felt lonely and neglected. He said that he hated his mother, although sometimes tender filial feelings for her awakened in his heart. Marco spoke of his father as a weak and spineless man. In the Marialini family, the authoritarian mother always ruled. Marco did not overlook the story of his married life with Lucia. However, he decided to hide his ex-wife's real name under a fictitious pseudonym, for her safety. But Monica appears in Marialini's book under the name Barbara. The man described all the intricacies of their relationship in detail and frankly, strict diets, total control, and unlimited power over the girl. However, in the book version of events, the ending is somewhat different from reality. On the last pages, the author kills the heroine named Barbara. During the presentation of the autobiographical novel, Marco publicly characterized himself as a monster that needs to be stopped. This pompous tone did not please one literary critic present at the press conference at all. After reading Marialini's book, the reviewer hurried to the police station to report his suspicions. However, law enforcement officers did not attach any importance to his statement, as they perceived the murder of Barbara purely as an artistic fiction. And there were no formal grounds for accusing Marco at that time. He had no offenses on record. At the time of the publication of the scandalous autobiography, Marialini's former partner had another year of house arrest left. Marco even sent Monica an author's copy of the book. On the flyleaf, the man made an intriguing inscription, "To Monica, with love and hate." Marialini continued to call the girl, and she even recorded their conversations on a dictaphone. Monica was sincerely worried about Marco's mental state. Time and again, she persistently advised him to seek help from a specialist. Marialini heeded this advice and finally visited a psychotherapist's office. He sincerely told the doctor about his painful fantasies and manic desires. The man laid out the whole truth about his life before the psychotherapist, without hiding a single detail. After that, Marco was hospitalized in a psychiatric hospital for several weeks. However, the course of treatment did not yield the desired results. When the patient was discharged home, he had already managed to become disillusioned with traditional medicine. Marialini no longer believed that pills could help him. In 1998, the term of house arrest assigned to Monica Colorado finally ended. The 29-year-old girl gained the right to travel freely around Italy. Marco continued to call the girl off the hook, begging for a meeting. At first, Monica refused, but later realized that the annoying admirer would not leave her alone so easily. Eventually, the girl agreed to a date but put forward her own conditions. The meeting should take place during the day in a crowded place. On July 14, 1998, Marco and Monica met in the town of Verbania, on the coast of the famous Lake Maggiore. The conversation took place on a small beach where young couples were swimming and sunbathing. After a short negotiation, Marialini began to insist that the girl return to him and resume their relationship. Monica categorically refused. In response, Marco began to blackmail her and threaten her with physical violence. All this time, the former partners did not get up from the sand, continuing to sit on the shore. Suddenly Monica jumped up and ran away. However, the enraged Marco quickly caught up with her and threw her to the ground. The frightened girl screamed loudly, begging for help. Then Marialini covered his victim's mouth with his palm. Shocked passers-by already began to gather around, but none of the eyewitnesses dared to intervene in the conflict. The frenzied Marco pulled out a knife and inflicted 22 wounds on various parts of Monica's body. The girl died on the spot from her injuries. One of the witnesses to the tragedy called the police. Before the arrival of the ambulance and law enforcement officers at the crime scene, Marco managed to swim far from the shore. The officers had to chase the suspect in a rescue boat. Marialini was arrested and handcuffed right in the middle of the lake. During the interrogation, the man admitted his guilt. However, he claimed that he did not plan to kill his beloved girl. Marialini was sure that he would be able to charm Monica during the date, and she herself would want to return to him. As an alternative, Marco considered kidnapping his former passion. In his car, parked near the ill-fated beach, the police found ropes, chains, knives, locks, and tape. But in the end, all the maniac's plans were thwarted, feelings took precedence over reason, and he committed a terrible crime. Marialini denied his intention to flee the scene. According to his version, he entered the lake with the aim of committing suicide but never dared to do it. During a search of Marco's dwelling, investigators seized strange drawings that outwardly resembled comics. On each sheet, the insane author depicted himself in the form of a huge ball, while his beloved next to him resembled a thin line. In his clumsy creations, Marialini mocked and humiliated women. In 2001, while the investigation into the resonant case was ongoing, 42-year-old Marco gave a big interview to journalists. The man appeared at the meeting with the pen sharks in a strange image that he had designed himself. Marialini shaved only the right half of his face, and left the left unshaven. According to him, this was supposed to symbolize the eternal duality of human nature. Whether we want it or not, every person has a light and a dark side, the killer remarked philosophically during the interview. By the way, when communicating with media representatives, Marco did not even try to repent of what he had done. Instead, he pompously declared that he saw no other way to solve the problem, and therefore used the only possible course of action. At the same time, in conversation, Marialini repeatedly emphasized that he posed a considerable danger to the community. A psychiatric examination found Marco sane and guilty of premeditated murder. The court sentenced him to 30 years in prison. Behind bars, the prisoner behaved extremely strangely. Marialini declared a hunger strike, took laxatives, and in a short time lost weight to 44 kilograms. However, very quickly the maniac changed his mind about starving himself and regained his lost weight. In addition, Marco constantly created problems for the administration of the correctional institution. He started fires in his cell and harmed the guards. For this, he was repeatedly transferred to other prisons. While in detention, Marialini wrote several letters in which he begged not to release him early. Marco claimed that once at large, he would certainly commit a new murder. However, later the man denied this information and for some time did not make such threats. But then he started again and repeated the same warnings. The fate of the serial killer inspired Italian director Matteo Garrone to create a thriller. In 2004, the director shot and presented to the public a low-budget film, First Love, which, however, did not win high awards and remained almost unnoticed by critics. In 2021, the management of the correctional institution considered Marialini's application for parole. However, instead of the coveted freedom, the man ended up in a psychiatric hospital. In the same year, Marco was visited by a film crew from one of the TV channels. The journalists wanted to talk to the 62-year-old maniac. However, he stated that he no longer wished to recall his bloody love story. What was in the past is long gone. Now I have forgotten everything, Marialini replied to the cameraman. Media representatives who managed to talk to Marco noticed striking changes in his behavior. The maniac no longer resembled a monster, but rather reminded them of a lost and confused old man. The man was poorly oriented in space, often hung up, and left even the simplest questions unanswered. Obviously, such a striking metamorphosis was caused by the prolonged intake of potent psychotropic drugs. In the spring of 2024, after 3 years of careful observation of the patient, doctors will have to make a final decision on the future fate of Marco Marialini. There is a minuscule chance that the maniac will be released. But most likely, he is destined to remain forever behind the walls of a psychiatric hospital. Insanity is something irrational and incomprehensible. A person can simply live their life without causing harm to anyone, but become a victim of a brutal murder for some far-fetched reasons. This was the fate that befell Shirley Goodnight, who was born on August 11, 1950 in Mooresville, North Carolina, USA. Shirley was always described as a friendly and caring woman who easily found common ground with people and surrounded herself with positivity wherever she was. She was a very active person and quickly made new acquaintances. From childhood, Shirley was a faithful parishioner of the local church, where she went every Sunday with her entire family. In 1970, when Shirley turned 20, she met a man named Randall. There was an instant mutual attraction between them, and the young couple began dating. Very quickly, they realized that they could not live without each other and decided to get married. Soon after the wedding, the couple had a daughter, whom they named Tracy. However, after 11 years of marriage, in 1981, Shirley and Randall's relationship broke down. They constantly quarreled over any little thing, and conflicts arose out of nowhere. The situation in the family was escalating, so the couple eventually decided to divorce. Shirley was left to raise her daughter alone without the financial support of her ex-husband. She had to look for additional income to support herself and her child. During this difficult period, mother and daughter became very close, almost like best friends. They did their favorite things together, and Tracy supported her mother in every way, understanding how hard it was for her. Unfortunately, there were few jobs in Mooresville, so Shirley and her daughter decided to move to the city of Kannapolis, which is also located in North Carolina. It is a small town where most residents have an above-average income. Shirley was lucky enough to get a job at a textile company. Management quickly noticed the professionalism and hard work of the new employee, highly appreciating her skills. Colleagues also spoke very highly of Shirley. Over time, the woman worked her way up to the position of assistant manager. In Kannapolis, Shirley was actively involved in volunteer work, organizing golf tournaments and fundraisers for local charities. The years passed, Tracy grew up and left her childhood home. Because of this, Shirley felt lonely and decided to try to find a life partner and build a new relationship. But, unfortunately, all her attempts were unsuccessful. In 2003, fate brought Shirley together with a man named Richard. However, he turned out to be very aggressive and abusive, so their relationship quickly ended. Unfortunately, this had unpleasant consequences for Shirley. Richard could not come to terms with the breakup and began to harass his former partner. Eventually, the woman had to go to court, which issued a restraining order against Richard. 6 years had passed since the breakup with Richard, and Shirley finally decided to try to find her happiness again. By that time, her daughter Tracy had already given birth to a son, making Shirley a grandmother. The woman was infinitely happy and spent a lot of time with her grandson. In 2009, when Shirley turned 58, she believed that despite her age, she still had a chance to meet true love. That was when she met Chuck Rivas, an employee of the same textile company as herself. Although they worked together, their acquaintance happened by chance. Gradually, Shirley and Chuck began dating, but this time the woman was very careful and did not want to rush things. Their relationship lasted 4 years, but the couple never dared to live together. In the spring of 2013, Chuck proposed to Shirley. At that time, she was already 62 years old, and she happily agreed to become his wife. This proposal was long awaited for Shirley, because for the first time in her life, her relationship with a man was truly harmonious. The woman often told friends and family about her deep feelings for Chuck, considering him her destiny. Shirley was eagerly awaiting the wedding, not even suspecting what tragedy awaited her ahead. On July 23, 2013, at 9:40 a.m., 59-year-old Chuck Rivas called the police. He said that he had come to his fiancée's house, but she had not opened the door for a long time. The man managed to get inside through an unlocked garage. Going up to the second floor, Chuck immediately heard the sound of water in the bathroom. Shirley did not respond to his voice, so he assumed that she might have slipped, fallen, and needed help. Entering the bathroom, Chuck saw his fiancée lying on the floor all injured, in a flooded room. The man tried to provide first aid to Shirley, but could not bring her to consciousness, so he called the 911 rescue service. When law enforcement officers arrived at the scene, Chuck was waiting for them outside the house. Upon entering, the officers immediately smelled a strong odor of bleach and noticed traces of it on the floor. There were untouched bloodstains scattered everywhere, and some areas looked thoroughly wiped. This instantly aroused suspicion among the police officers. It seemed as if someone had tried to destroy certain evidence, while leaving other traces. The victim's face was covered with deep wounds, which were also noticeable on the neck and chest. It was obvious that Shirley had become a victim of a brutal attack, not an accident. It became clear to the medical examiner that the criminal had acted in a state of frenzied rage or anger. Most likely, the murder weapon was in the hands of a person who knew Shirley well and felt a strong hatred towards her. The upper part of the victim's body was literally cut to pieces. The killer, it seemed, did not want to leave the woman any chance of survival, so he inflicted dozens of blows on her. Shirley had clearly desperately defended herself, as evidenced by the characteristic injuries on her body. This situation seemed strange, because Shirley did not at all resemble a person capable of causing so much negativity in someone. She was kind to everyone, did not conflict with anyone and simply could not have enemies. Upon learning of her mother's death, Tracy immediately came to the police station. The young woman did not hold back her tears, but at the same time willingly cooperated with the investigation. Like everyone else, she was in complete confusion as to who could have hurt her mother. Detectives had already established that the attacker had not resorted to breaking windows or doors. This suggested that he was familiar with the victim and could freely enter her house. Accordingly, the first suspect was Chuck, who was in a close relationship with Shirley and was the person who discovered the body and called the police. Investigators knew perfectly well that statistically in such crimes, the person closest to the victim is very often the culprit. Despite the fact that Tracy considered Chuck incapable of such brutality, the man was immediately taken for questioning. He looked very depressed, but willingly cooperated. The deceased's fiancée answered all the investigators' questions in detail, trying to provide as much useful information as possible to help solve this case as quickly as possible. Chuck said that he had last spoken with his beloved the night before, around 11 p.m. At that time, he was on a business trip and was about to leave for Mooresville. Shirley stayed to look after his dog. During a normal phone conversation, the couple discussed Chuck's return home and their upcoming meeting. The man promised to come the next morning to pick up his pet. Suddenly, during their dialogue, the connection was cut off. However, Chuck did not attach much importance to this, because in the Kannapolis area there were often interruptions in the mobile network. He did not hear any screams or suspicious sounds on the handset. The man assumed that Shirley might have simply left the coverage area. Moreover, they had already managed to discuss everything necessary and were going to end the conversation anyway. That is why Chuck decided not to call back, because they already had a meeting scheduled for the morning. He simply put the phone away and went to rest before the return trip. The next morning, the man arrived at his fiancée's house exactly at the specified time. The first thing that caught his eye was the open garage door and the closed front door. This was not typical for Shirley, but Chuck assumed that she might have just returned from the store and simply did not have time to close everything. He knocked on the door and rang the bell, but no one answered. Not wanting to show disrespect and break into someone else's home, the man still decided to enter through the garage. It was there, in the bathroom, that he came across the lifeless body of his future wife. Chuck's story completely coincided with all the data collected by law enforcement officers at the crime scene. It seemed that he was telling the truth, but the police were in no hurry to release the main suspect. When Chuck realized that he had received this unpleasant status, he was extremely indignant and offended. Fortunately, the man was able to provide an alibi, confirmed by his employer and video surveillance footage. Judging by the time stamps, at the time of the attack on Shirley, her fiancé was at the hotel, resting before the return trip, and then driving on the highway in his car. In addition, detectives knew that during a knife attack, the perpetrator very often suffers injuries himself, especially deep cuts on the hands. But Chuck's palms turned out to be completely unharmed, which finally convinced the police of his innocence in the crime. The officers assumed that the real attacker had been injured, and that was why he had tried to wipe away some of the bloodstains that belonged to him. This explained the strong smell of bleach and the characteristic stains from cleaning agents on the floor in the victim's house. Having lost their only lead, the detectives reached a dead end. When they asked Chuck who else could have been involved in the murder, he only shrugged his shoulders, assuring that Shirley simply could not have enemies. The only person who had negative feelings towards the woman was her ex-boyfriend Richard. Tracy confirmed her stepfather's words, because at one time she had seen with her own eyes Richard's cruel treatment of her mother, the difficult breakup of the relationship and the court order of protection that Shirley had won for her own safety. According to her daughter, the former lover had an extremely cruel and aggressive character, which completely corresponded to the psychological profile of the criminal. Tracy recalled that in 2003, when her mother was dating Richard, their relationship was very toxic. The man humiliated Shirley, morally and emotionally oppressed her, and at the final stages of their life together, he began to use physical. Immediately after the breakup, Richard even threatened to stab his former partner with a screwdriver. It was this incident that forced Shirley to turn to the police and obtain a court ban. After that, Richard moved to another city, where he lived for about 10 years before Shirley was found dead in her own home. However, about 6 months before the murder, he returned and even tried to resume communication with his ex-girlfriend. However, Shirley categorically refused to meet with him. Of course, such a coincidence seemed quite suspicious. As it turned out, at the time of the investigation, Richard was still living nearby and working in the town of Lumberton, located just 15 minutes' drive from the victim's house. The police immediately went to the specified address to talk to the man in person. At that time, Richard was already 65 years old. From the very beginning of the conversation, he tried to justify against Shirley in the past, calling everything a banal misunderstanding. Moreover, official charges against him had long been dropped. The man also provided law enforcement officers with his alibi, saying that the night before he had worked from 9 to 6, after which he went home and went to bed around 9. But since Richard lived alone, there was no one to confirm his words, so this alibi had no value. Hoping to see fresh wounds on the suspect's hands, the detectives carefully examined them, but instead noticed only skin covered with ulcers. This led the police to think about some kind of disease that affected the condition of the epidermis. In any case, the injuries were not at all similar to those that Richard could have received as a result of a struggle with the victim. And the man himself looked rather frail and feeble, barely moving. In such physical shape, he could hardly cope with Shirley. In the end, the detectives concluded that Richard was not involved in the murder, which was confirmed by his medical history. Having crossed out Shirley's ex-boyfriend from the list of suspects, the investigators again found themselves at a dead end. Of course, they did not ignore the version of Tracy's involvement, but the victim's daughter was also quickly excluded from this list. Then the assumption surfaced that the murder occurred during a burglary with entry into a home. The open garage door suggested that the perpetrator could have entered the house from there. However, no valuables disappeared from Shirley's home, so it became clear that the attacker had come here with the sole purpose of killing the owner. So this version had to be discarded. While investigators were racking their brains over the information gathered, the deceased's colleague, Erwin Johnson, the financial director of the textile company, came to the station. The man claimed that he suspected his own 61-year-old wife Marlene of committing the crime. Erwin was immediately brought in for questioning to get more information from him, while the police began to gather information about the new person involved in the case. Marlene Johnson was born in 1952 into a wealthy family, so she grew up as a rather spoiled and capricious girl, prone to tantrums when something did not go the way she wanted. The woman was very concerned about her appearance, wore designer clothes and skillfully behaved in high society. On May 15, 1983, 31-year-old Marlene married 36-year-old Erwin Johnson. In many respects, the man was the complete opposite of his wife, restrained and calm, not too inclined to social fuss and ostentatious luxury. But despite all the differences, the couple complemented each other perfectly. A daughter was born in this marriage. There were no financial problems in the Johnson family. Erwin worked hard to provide for his family, and Marlene got everything she needed from her wealthy parents without making any effort. Subsequently, she inherited considerable wealth, which deprived her of the need to worry about money for the rest of her life. The woman was a rather nice person, pleasant to talk to and a caring mother. This lasted until 2003. It was then that Marlene experienced a serious nervous breakdown, which caused behavioral disorders and sudden mood swings. The woman turned to the best specialists she could find, but nothing helped. At the end of 2003, Marlene even tried to take her own life, so she was prescribed more intensive treatment. However, according to Erwin, his wife never became the same. She became unpredictable and aggressive, repeatedly threatened her husband with violence, and was quite ready to put her threats into practice. During a conversation with the police, Erwin even showed a scar on his arm, a trace of a knife wound that Marlene had inflicted on him during one of the far-fetched conflicts, inflating a minor dispute to incredible proportions. The couple's relationship was rapidly deteriorating. At some point, Marlene began to suspect Erwin of marital infidelity. The man repeatedly assured that he had no one, showed his wife his social media pages, correspondence in messengers and a list of contacts, but the paranoid idea was firmly entrenched in Marlene's head. In 2006, the woman began to follow Erwin more closely. At that time, he worked at a textile company together with Shirley. Marlene suddenly decided that it was with her that her husband was cheating. In fact, the reason for this obsession was a mere acquaintance between Marlene and Shirley, which Erwin himself had arranged. His wife did not like the way the heroine of the story communicated with her husband. It seemed to her that she behaved too casually and familiarly, although in reality there was a completely friendly working relationship between colleagues. Shirley and Erwin worked closely together and became close as good friends, but in Marlene's eyes it looked inappropriate. It was at that moment that she developed an unhealthy obsession with the woman whose only fault was that she worked side by side with Erwin. This obsessive idea led to Marlene stalking Shirley for several years after 2006. On September 12, 2010, she even hired a private detective to uncover the imaginary relationship between her husband and colleague. However, after a month of work, the investigator did not notice anything suspicious in the behavior of Shirley and Erwin. But instead of reassuring the jealous wife, this conclusion became a reason to fire the detective and hire new ones, continuing the surveillance. The new bloodhounds resorted to even more radical methods. They launched drones over Shirley's house, which circled around the clock and recorded every movement. Who comes to visit her? When and where does she leave the house? In fact, Marlene tracked her imaginary rival's every move, and she didn't even suspect it. Thanks to the drones, it was possible to find out that Shirley's garage door often remained unlocked, and Marlene could have used this loophole. The obsessed woman did not disdain to follow her own husband in vain attempts to obtain evidence of his infidelity. Despite the lack of even the slightest compromising evidence, Marlene continued to firmly believe that Erwin was cheating on her with a colleague. The first unpleasant incident occurred during one of the charity events. In front of all the company's employees, Marlene suddenly slapped Shirley in the face and publicly accused her of having an affair with Erwin. Those present were shocked by this wild scene. In 2011, Shirley was going on a picnic with a group of colleagues, among whom was Erwin. By that time, many people, including Shirley herself, already knew about the inadequate behavior of his wife. That evening, Marlene decided to follow the cheaters on her own. She dressed all in black, put on an unusually large hat for herself and sat down not far from the table where Shirley's company was located. Marlene hid behind the menu and began to spy on her husband. In fact, she often had lunch or dinner at this restaurant, so she was recognized by one of the waitresses. The girl noticed the strange behavior of the regular customer and, knowing Erwin, asked him why his wife was behaving so oddly. Shirley felt uneasy, because she knew about Marlene's suspicions about her relationship with Erwin. So the woman decided to leave the restaurant. Colleagues literally surrounded her and accompanied her to the exit, trying to protect her from possible aggression from their friend's obsessed wife. Unfortunately, this attempt proved futile. As soon as Shirley approached the car and grabbed the door handle, Marlene pounced on her from behind, grabbed her hair, knocked her to the ground and began to beat her furiously with her feet. At the same time, the attacker was screaming wildly that this is exactly what happens to homewreckers who sleep with other people's husbands. Marlene was arrested for assault, but thanks to the connections of a wealthy family, she managed to quickly settle this incident. Shirley intended to press formal charges, but Erwin begged her not to. The man assured that he was keeping the situation under control. Shirley decided to heed her colleague's request, although in reality he did not control anything, he just hoped that the incident would not be repeated. Subsequently, Erwin Johnson told the police that after that fight, he finally moved away from his wife and moved to a separate apartment. Their marriage could be considered actually over, but Marlene did not calm down and continued to pester her ex-husband. Once she even pointed a gun at Erwin, and it was only by a miracle that he managed to get away alive. After that, the man obtained a court ban on approaching, although the couple did not officially divorce in order to avoid a long hassle with documents. Now, having turned to the police, Erwin was convinced that only Marlene could have been behind the brutal attack on Shirley. After all, the deceased no longer had other enemies. Unfortunately, since the incident with the beating of a colleague was settled without formal charges, the investigators had no leads that would lead them to Marlene. However, Erwin added that his wife is now dating a new boyfriend named Tim Connor. Perhaps it was he who could shed light on Marlene's strange behavior lately. Meanwhile, detectives obtained a search warrant for the home of the main suspect. They did not manage to catch her on the spot, but the next day the woman was found in her own car in the parking lot and taken into custody. While Marlene was at the station, law enforcement officers thoroughly searched her home and car. A considerable stock of cleaning agents, mostly bleach, was found in the trunk. Yes, the same bleach, traces of which forensic experts found in Shirley's house. Experts knew perfectly well that this is one of the few substances capable of almost tracelessly destroying any DNA, and therefore, extremely complicating the proof of the suspect's guilt. On Marlene's dining table, investigators came across numerous photographs taken from a drone. They depicted Shirley and her house at various moments of everyday life. It became obvious that Marlene's unhealthy obsession had lasted for years. The woman had completely dug up the biography of her victim, starting from early childhood, and was constantly looking for at least some confirmation of Erwin's betrayal. But she found nothing. For Shirley, who was preparing for her wedding with Chuck, her former colleague had long ceased to exist. Erwin himself had never even looked at another woman in all the years of his married life. What exactly caused Marlene's fierce hatred specifically for Shirley, the investigation never managed to find out. From the very beginning of the interrogations, the suspect was reluctant to cooperate with the police. The detectives noticed that despite her respectable age, she behaved like a spoiled child. Marlene refused to answer questions, was arrogant and limited herself to monosyllabic replies. Even when investigators asked questions that required a detailed answer, she simply said no. Having failed to get anything valuable from the detainee, the police photographed her hands and forearms. It turned out that there were as many as 5 rather fresh cuts on them. This seemed very strange, because Marlene had always been extremely careful about her appearance and looked impeccable. So the presence of such a number of abrasions could not but arouse suspicion among investigators. During the examination of the detainee, law enforcement officers noticed a badly broken nail. Judging by everything, the injury was received shortly before the arrest of the probable criminal, otherwise she would have already managed to restore her impeccable manicure. Considering all the circumstances, the bleach found in the victim's house, fresh cuts on Marlene's hands and evidence of her years-long obsession with Shirley, the police concluded that the evidence collected was quite sufficient to detain the suspect. After questioning, investigators tracked down Marlene's new lover, Tim Connor. The man spoke about her exclusively positively, describing her as a kind and pleasant woman. Tim worked as a motivational speaker, had numerous publications and earned a decent income. He and Marlene met during one of his autograph sessions. Connor provided his girlfriend with an alibi, saying that on the evening of July 23, he was discharged from the hospital after a serious operation. So he asked Marlene to stay overnight to take care of him. According to Tim, he woke up 3 or 4 times a night, and his beloved was there every time. Meanwhile, the forensic expert made an interesting discovery: a fragment of a knife blade was stuck in the throat of the murdered Shirley. This testified to the unprecedented brutality of the attack, during which even the cold weapon broke. All the knives were in place in the victim's kitchen, but one of the detectives noticed that in Connor's house, instead of 4 knives, only 3 were sticking out of the stand. Of course, due to the deformation of the fragment found in Shirley's body, it was impossible to accurately establish which set it came from. Nevertheless, the fragment was very reminiscent of the knives from Tim's kitchen. Upon learning of the murder and the missing blade, Connor decided to confess that he had lied about the surgery. He explained that Marlene herself called him and begged him to provide an alibi. The man claimed that he knew nothing about the disappearance of the knife and the probable involvement of his girlfriend in the massacre of Shirley. Tim stated that he simply believed his beloved and decided to cover her up, without going into details. Subsequently, the results of the analyses of physical evidence seized from the crime scene came in. Although someone had carefully tried to destroy all traces of DNA using bleach, this could not be done completely. On the curtain in the bathroom and on paper towels, criminologists found traces of blood that matched Marlene's samples. Since the woman had never been in the deceased's house before, the presence of her biomaterials at the crime scene could only be explained by direct participation in the murder. In addition, it turned out that shortly before her death, Shirley had received creepy calls during which someone simply breathed heavily into the receiver. The woman was convinced that the telephone stalker was none other than Marlene. The trial of the suspect began on January 24, 2018. From the very beginning, Marlene remained surprisingly calm, as if she was sure that the crime would go unpunished. The prosecutors focused the jury's attention on all the evidence gathered, including the proven years-long obsession of the accused and the incident with the attack in the parking lot. The prosecution had indisputable evidence, which only lacked the murder weapon. The prosecutors assumed that on the day of the murder, Marlene was waiting for Shirley near her house. When the victim opened the garage to park the car, the attacker slipped inside. It happened in the evening, so the owner probably wanted to take a shower after a working day. According to the investigation, the attack occurred at the very moment when Shirley was talking on the phone with her fiancé Chuck and was going to the bathroom. The massacre itself began in the bedroom, and then the killer dragged the victim into the shower and inflicted several more knife wounds. Then the criminal went to her car parked nearby and got bleach and other means to destroy the traces from there. She carefully wiped the floor, but did not take into account that drops of blood could remain on the curtain. Having considered the totality of the evidence, the jury unequivocally found Marialini guilty of first-degree murder. The 66-year-old defendant was sentenced to life imprisonment without the right to parole. Upon hearing the verdict, the woman screamed loudly and fainted right in the courtroom. Toros, a Brazilian native, gained immense popularity on social media. Millions of fans followed the life of this charming girl. Some genuinely admired her, while others secretly envied her. However, few knew about the gloomy reality hidden behind the glamorous facade. Was born on October 24, 1989, in northern Brazil, into a poor, dysfunctional family. Her father suffered from alcoholism. By the age of 12, the girl began to accentuate her appearance with bright red lipstick and got a stylish Coco Chanel-inspired haircut. Friends and acquaintances already predicted the young beauty's success in the modeling business, lavishing her with compliments. A few years later, hoping to earn some money, sent her application to a modeling agency. She was immediately noticed and invited to a photo shoot. After receiving her first paycheck, the girl left her parents' home. And at 18, she had the opportunity to move to Europe, which of course, did not refuse. Hi, I'm Toros, a model and actress. I currently work in Milan. I'm originally from Brazil. I consider myself a good person, so I always smile. In my opinion, life is beautiful, and we should constantly give a smile. Mostly modeled swimwear and lingerie. She was invited to photo shoots in South Korea and Colombia. Her career skyrocketed. The girl's photos appeared more and more often on the covers of glossy magazines. Later, the model moved to the USA, where she began attending celebrity parties. Once, was spotted in the company of Leonardo DiCaprio. The Brazilian media attributed a romance to the couple, which allegedly lasted no more than a month. In 2013, settled in a luxurious penthouse with a panoramic view of the Statue of Liberty in New York. Neighbors couldn't help but notice the young resident's designer clothes, expensive bags, and precious jewelry. It became clear that had a wealthy patron. Close associates knew that the girl was dating a Russian oligarch who fully provided for her, renting out chic apartments. He showered with expensive gifts, such as a diamond-studded watch. At first, she didn't reveal his name, only later starting to refer to him as Mr. A. Showed a photo of her benefactor to a close friend, who described him as an oddly-looking old man. However, no one had ever seen this man in person. Met with him in France, sailed on his yacht, and sometimes visited him in Russia. The girl confessed that she was in love with the billionaire and communicated with him daily by phone. Yet was bored in New York. Meetings with the mysterious oligarch were infrequent. But the girl did not neglect other men who generously rewarded her for dates and affection. However, everything changed when suddenly experienced health problems. She underwent an emergency surgery to remove her breast implants. The recovery was long and difficult. Lost the interest of men, her Russian patron stopped communicating, and other admirers vanished instantly. After the surgery, the model ended her runway career. An attempt to become an actress also failed. Connections with the Hollywood elite led to become fascinated with ayahuasca, a hallucinogenic drink used by indigenous shamans to communicate with spirits. The girl attended ceremonies where people sat on the floor and sang songs. Friends believed that it was after these rituals that the blonde began to lose her mind. She claimed that she had always possessed a prophetic gift, calling it her inner voice. Under the influence of ayahuasca, believed in her own chosenness and uniqueness. It seemed to her that she was simply obliged to help other people. Popularity on the internet skyrocketed. She created her own brand, teaching subscribers to lead a healthy lifestyle, attract love, money, and success, and fulfill any desires. On her page, the girl posted charming lifestyle-inspired photos, wrote motivational quotes, and gave advice. Demonstrated a carefree life filled with travel, followed by millions of followers. During this time, she was dating a young businessman named Ben, who helped develop her brand. Ket published a book titled The Voice. In it, she described her difficult childhood, and abuse, and how, overcoming all obstacles, she managed to escape poverty and achieve success. She wrote about how her dreams of wealth and a luxurious life became a reality. In 2017, Ket started personal consultations for women. She inspired her clients, gave useful advice, taught spiritual practices and self-care skills, and how to be in harmony with oneself. In advertising her services, Ket assured, "I can solve your problem and help you." Visitors to her profile found solace in these words. Toros' online sessions resembled therapy. She skillfully encouraged and supported women. The cost of one video call was about $150. Together with Ben, Ket visited various churches, studying religious practices. She was particularly fascinated by the famous Brazilian healer João de Deus, who was later accused and sentenced to 500 years in prison. Another idol of the girl was the American coach Tony Robbins. She dreamed of repeating his success. Anna, one of Ket's clients, recounted, "I came across Ket just when I was going through a painful exit from a toxic relationship. I already had a difficult childhood behind me. I had a bunch of health problems. All I did was go to doctors. I lost a lot of weight, but no one could help me. I lost hope. I thought my life was over. And it was at that moment that I found Ket, clinging to her like a straw." Anna was studying in Boston, Massachusetts. According to her, Ket convinced her to move to New York and become a household assistant. Toros wrote to the girl that she would take care of her cats, cook, clean the apartment, and perform other household duties. For this, she promised to pay $2,000 a month. Anna agreed. When she first entered Ket's apartment, she was horrified by the mess. Garbage and dirty clothes were everywhere. Cats urinated right on the hostess bed. It was evident that Ket was completely unsuited to everyday life and unable to handle even the most basic things. The apartment was constantly lit. Ket hardly slept. Silence was unbearable for her, so even when taking a shower, she called Anna to talk. The assistant could only nap when Ket went on dates with her regular suitors. The blonde would return late at night or early in the morning and immediately wake Anna up. Toros did everything possible to isolate the girl from the outside world, limiting her communication even by phone. Anna actually lived in Ket's apartment, working for her almost around the clock. However, she never received the promised $2,000 a month. The model never paid her a cent. Very soon, Anna realized that she was simply being manipulated and used. Ket had some power over the girl and skillfully took advantage of it. It took Anna 3 months to escape. However, Toros did not stop trying to get the assistant back, constantly calling and sending messages. Their toxic communication lasted for about a year. Anna was in constant fear, thinking about how to expose her former employer. But the girl was afraid of the consequences. Later, Anna realized that she was one of Ket Toros' first victims. In the summer of 2022, 32-year-old Ket moved to Texas with her 21-year-old fiancé Zach. The couple rented a large house with 5 bedrooms, but after a couple of months, they were evicted for non-payment of rent. Neighbors noticed Ket and Zach carrying boxes filled with broken voodoo dolls and dried herbs out of the house. Toros ordered these goods in large quantities and then resold them through social networks. By that time, she was already assuring her subscribers that with the help of magic, she could heal various ailments. The cost of her consultations doubled. During online sessions, Ket told clients that she communicated with otherworldly entities. She told Christians that she spoke with God, and atheists that she contacted the spirits of ancestors. Sometimes, a few days after the consultation, she would call back and claim that she had received a message from higher powers on how best to act in a particular situation. The girl assured that all who listened to the advice of her inner voice achieved success and happiness. And those who did not believe were in for terrible troubles. After moving to Austin, Ket and Zach rented another spacious house. At the same time, Toros intensified the search for new assistants. Once, she called her Brazilian client Desiree in tears, saying, "I feel sick, my health is deteriorating, I think I'm going to die soon. Please come to me in Austin. I want you to be by my side, I only trust you and Zach." The girls talked on the phone for 2 hours, and that same day Ket bought Desiree a ticket. The girl quit her job and flew to Austin. After that, Toros posted a message on social media about creating her own women's clan. In addition to Desiree, Ket managed to convince 2 more clients, 18-year-old Letitia and 20-year-old Sol, to move in with her. As soon as the beauties crossed the threshold of the house, the hostess would lead them to her sorcery room, where there was a large altar with candles and icons. Ket would kneel and pray for each girl, asking the angels for health and prosperity for them. Sol, who hides her real name, previously taught yoga and came to Ket from Boston. Toros promised to pay her for help in organizing the business and assured that she would receive a decent salary. Instead, Sol had to work as an ordinary housekeeper without receiving a cent for it. One day, Ket told the girl that she should go to a strip club and start dancing. Allegedly, that's where Sol would meet her future husband, with whom she would have a long and happy marriage. That's what the inner voice told her. Sol agreed. Desiree, on the other hand, flew to Ket from Brazil. Toros told her about her escort experience at Hollywood parties and about acquaintances with models who earned big money dating rich men. Then Ket informed Desiree that she had spent a considerable amount of money on her flight, accommodation, food, furniture, and even magical rituals. Now the girl had to work off this debt. Toros threatened to put a curse on her if she ran away. She persuaded Desiree to work at a strip club, giving all the money she earned. The girl danced every day and quickly became popular. "I had to strip completely in front of men and communicate with them. In 2 weeks, I earned $9,000, Desiree recounted. Ket took all the money and put it in a safe in her room. The girl's passport was also kept there. Toros convinced Desiree that she should not carry documents with her so that no one would find out about her illegal stay in the USA. Soon, Ket set a mandatory daily plan for her, at least $1,000 per shift. If the norm was not met, the hostess would not let the girl into the house, so sometimes she had to sleep on a bench. Desiree often fell ill, suffering from physical and psychological exhaustion. She kept asking Ket when they would finally start doing real business. She evaded the answer, saying that Desiree had not yet worked off all the money invested in her. Toros claimed that she had to continuously perform witchcraft so that the girl could come to the USA without a visa. Meanwhile, Ket lived in the same house with her fiancé Zach and 3 assistants, Desiree, Letitia, and Sol. There were strict rules. The girls could not communicate with each other and leave their rooms without the hostess's permission. They were forbidden to say no to Ket and tell anyone about their life under her roof. The assistants had to unquestioningly follow all of Toros' instructions. When Desiree was finally allowed to leave the strip club, the girl had to meet men them for money instead. The same fate befell Letitia. The first to escape from Ket's house was Sol. She spent 42 days there and realized what trouble she had gotten into. The girl contacted her ex-boyfriend, who helped her get out of there. Sol was very afraid that Toros would find her and force her to return. After all, she had copies of her passport and driver's license with all her personal information. In addition, Sol knew that Zach had 6 pistols, so she feared that he could track her down and harm her. Meanwhile, Desiree and Letitia were still held captive in Toros' house. Ket created their profiles on dating sites and forced them to escort, demanding to bring in $3,000 a day. The girls were strictly forbidden to contact relatives and friends. Parents who knew that their daughters had gone to meet blogger Ket Toros and then disappeared turned to the police asking to find them. Soon the news of the disappearance of 2 young beauties spread throughout the states. Then Anna, Ket's first assistant, went to the police and told about her life with Toros. In response, she posted a message with threats against the girl. Ket claimed that she sheltered Anna, and she repaid her with betrayal. Toros insisted that her subscribers angrily condemn Anna in the comments. The blogger promised to turn the traitor's life into a real hell. Meanwhile, Anna, together with Sol, filed police reports. The girls claimed that Ket forcibly kept them in her house, forcing them to work for free. Feeling the danger from law enforcement, Toros forced Desiree and Letitia to record videos in which they claimed to live with her voluntarily. The girls spoke enthusiastically about Ket, calling her their savior. In the videos, they asked relatives not to look for them, not to call, and not to write, assuring that they no longer wanted to communicate with their parents. Seeing these recordings, the families of Desiree and Letitia became even more convinced that the girls were in danger and needed immediate rescue. Ket did not stop sending threats to Anna and Sol. Even the father of her fiancé Zach got his share. The man was set against Toros, for which she cursed him and wished him death. Soon Ket, along with Zach and 3 assistants, moved to the state of Maine. The police closely monitored them. Once, Toros, who was driving in a car with her fiancé and the girls, was called from the police station. When the officers asked if she was holding the assistants by force, the blogger denied it. The law enforcers asked her to come to the station for a conversation, and she agreed. As soon as Ket put down the receiver, she began instructing Desiree and Letitia on what to say to the police. At the same time, she openly threatened the girls, not suspecting that they were secretly recording the conversation on the phone. The next day, the whole company appeared at the police station in Maine. Desiree and Letitia, extremely intimidated, were silent most of the time. Instead, Ket willingly talked about her business. According to her, the girls were her voluntary assistants, and envious people just wanted to harm the successful blogger. It was there that Desiree and Letitia finally realized that Toros had ruthlessly manipulated them, forcing them to commit shameful acts, lie, and completely isolate themselves from society. The girls told everything to the police. Ket was arrested on charges of human trafficking, exploitation, and fraud in the healthcare sector. The 33-year-old fraudster was deported to her native Brazil. Since November 2022, Toros has been behind bars. After her arrest, more than 20 young women admitted that they became victims of deception and manipulation by the blogger. However, Ket herself categorically denies guilt. In her opinion, she does not deserve to sit in prison next to women who have committed 10 to 15 murders each. Here's how Toros commented on the situation: listening to the girls' testimonies in court, I was surprised why they were lying so shamelessly. I could barely restrain myself from laughing out loud. People say that I am dangerous to society, that I can take over someone else's mind and control it. But at the same time, they claim that I am a fraud without any abilities. Doesn't one contradict the other? For 9 years now, I have been working with people. I have a special gift, an inner voice. With my help, up to 14,000 clients have changed their lives for the better, including millionaires and famous personalities. But there are always envious people around. I'm used to it. There are people who are naturally talentless, and there are those like me, talented in everything. Many say that I sing pretty well. I know that sooner or later fame will come to me, wherever I am. Ket assures that she still hears her inner voice and is doing the right thing. She denies that the girls lived with her under the same roof and worked in her house. One of the pieces of evidence in court was large money transfers from Desiree, Letitia, and Sol to Toros. Ket explained it simply: she sometimes asked her assistants to lend her money for a taxi. In July 2024, Ket Toros was found guilty and sentenced to 8 years in prison. Anna admits that she went to a psychotherapist for 3 years. During this time, she did a tremendous amount of inner work and can now talk about what she experienced without tears or hysteria. The girl is reassured by the thought that the perpetrator is serving her sentence. She hopes that other victims will stop being silent and start going to the police with their stories. Desiree from Brazil wrote a book about her horrifying experience living with Toros. According to her, she still feels the consequences of the horror she endured. Desiree believes that her story will serve as a warning to many. Toros will be released in the fall of 2030 when she turns 41. The Brazilian court also banned her from using the internet for life. Law enforcement officials warn that the popularity of social networks has made them a kind of portal for human trafficking. These platforms create an extensive communication network for fraudsters and criminals. Nowadays, it is easier than ever to deceive and recruit a gullible person. Always remember this and be on your guard. Outwardly, Gerard and Alison Baden-Clay seemed like the perfect loving couple. But behind closed doors, things were very different. Alison's close friends even warned her to leave her husband. Then one day, the woman suddenly vanished without a trace. Alison, née Dickey, was born on July 1, 1968, in a suburb of Brisbane, Queensland, Australia. She grew up in a well-off, complete family. From a young age, the girl was passionate about ballet and devoted much time to it. Alison successfully finished school and later earned a university degree. She was always among the top students and spoke 6 languages fluently. At the age of 25, in 1993, the charming Alison won a local beauty pageant. The jury was particularly impressed by her ballet dance. Shortly after graduating from university, she got a job at the Brisbane company, Afflaid Centre, in the HR department. Alison quickly climbed the career ladder, and her supervisor spoke of her as a talented, smart, and promising employee. It was at work that fate brought Alison together with her future husband, Gerard. He was born on September 9, 1970, in the British town of Bournemouth. Interestingly, Gerard's great-grandfather, Robert Baden-Powell, was a famous military leader and founder of the Scouting movement in Great Britain. When the boy turned 1, his family moved to Zambia, the homeland of Gerard's father, Nickell Clay. They lived there for 8 years and then decided to immigrate to Australia. Gerard finished school, qualified as an accountant, and started working at the Afflaid Centre. That's where he met his future wife, Alison. Romantic feelings immediately sparked between the young people. And on August 23, 1997, the couple got married. After celebrating the wedding, the newlyweds went on a small trip around the world. They visited South America, Switzerland, and spent several weeks in London. Upon returning home to Australia, Alison continued working at the Afflaid Centre. Within a few years, she held a managerial position there. In 2002, she became pregnant, and 9 months later, the couple had a long-awaited baby girl, Hannah. Alison quit her job to fully dedicate herself to family and caring for little Hannah. Meanwhile, Gerard changed jobs several times. In 2004, he opened his own prestigious real estate agency in Brisbane, having purchased a franchise. Gerard gave jobs to his parents at this agency, and they helped him run the firm. Gerard was an energetic, sociable, and self-confident man. He liked being the center of attention. He spent almost all his time at work. That same year, 2004, a second girl, Sarah, was born into the Baden-Clay family. And 3 years later, in 2007, Alison gave birth to their third daughter, whom they named Ella. At that time, the family was renting a house in Brookfield, a rural suburb of Brisbane. Alison took care of the children and rarely left home. But after some time, she noticed that Gerard began to distance himself from her. One day, he even confessed that he no longer loved her. Gerard started nitpicking at his wife over the smallest things, either she didn't season a dish well or didn't have time to clean up. He could call Alison lazy and say she no longer attracted him as a woman. Alison endured it all in silence. The woman kept a personal diary. In it, she wrote about her love for her husband and the frequent quarrels in the family. Alison believed that she was to blame for everything. She was convinced that if she corrected her mistakes, her husband would love her again. Allison hid her inner turmoil and problems in family life behind a smile. She was always a friendly, gentle woman, a caring mother, and a devoted wife. In 2011, after a series of devastating floods in Queensland, Gerard's real estate agency found itself in a difficult situation. To avoid losing the business, the man had to borrow large sums of money. The debts amounted to nearly $1 million Australian dollars. And in October of the same year, Allison accidentally found out that Gerard had long been cheating on her with his employee Tony McHugh. Gerard and Tony met back in 2008. At first, Tony was a client of Gerard's agency, and then he hired her. At that time, the woman had already been married for 17 years and was raising children, but her relationship with her husband was not going well. Having started a passionate affair with Gerard, Tony divorced her husband. Tony knew that Gerard was married. But he assured his mistress that he and his wife were just friends. Allegedly, there had been no intimacy between them for a long time, and he was living with Allison only for the sake of their daughters. Gerard promised Tony that they would definitely be together soon and that he would marry her. But almost 4 years passed, and the man still did not dare to leave his family. When Allison discovered the marital infidelity in October 2011, Gerard promised Tony that he would divorce her. He broke off relations with his mistress and fired her from the agency. Gerard mended his relationship with Allison and begged his wife for forgiveness. She forgave him. But just a couple of months later, in January 2012, the man again invited Tony out on a date to a cafe. Gerard came to the meeting without his wedding ring. He once again professed his love to Tony, telling her how hard it was for him without her. He promised that in 6 months, he would definitely file for divorce. The woman believed her lover and hoped for a happy resolution to their secret relationship. Another 4 months passed. On the evening of Thursday, April 19, 2012, Tony was driving home from work. On the way, she called Gerard. It was an ordinary conversation. They were discussing an upcoming real estate conference. Suddenly, the man informed her that the next day at the event, Tony would have to meet his wife, Allison. This news struck Tony unpleasantly. She began questioning Gerard about why he hadn't told her about this earlier, why he had been silent for so long. The angry woman shouted that the man had been deceiving her all along. Tony doubted whether they should continue their relationship at all. Gerard apologized, once again swore his feelings to his mistress, and promised that in 3 months, he would finally divorce. He said he would definitely leave Allison, even though she had mental health problems. Gerard began apologizing and assuring Tony of his feelings. He promised that the divorce process would be completed in just 3 months. The man insisted that he would definitely leave Allison, even though he knew about her mental health problems. The next morning, on Friday, April 20th, at 7:14 a.m., an agitated Gerard called the police. He reported that the previous evening, around 10 o'clock, his wife Allison had gone for a walk and still had not returned home. Soon, a police patrol arrived at the Baden-Clay family's house. First of all, the officers were alerted by the deep, jagged cuts on Gerard's face. He explained that he had simply cut himself while shaving. At the request of the police, the man undressed so that his bodily injuries could be photographed. On Gerard's chest, law enforcement officers noticed numerous small red dots. According to him, the previous evening, when he was changing a light bulb in the yard, some caterpillar had bitten him. During the house inspection, the officers found no suspicious traces. The dwelling was clean and tidy, the beds were made. Gerard, meanwhile, calmly got his daughters ready for school and kindergarten. The police talked to the girls, 10-year-old Hannah, 8-year-old Sarah, and 5-year-old Ella. The children said that the previous evening, they had fallen asleep to their mother's lullaby. Then Allison turned off the light, left the room, and they never saw her again. While talking to the officers, the girls could not hold back their tears. They said their parents had always tried to be good and cheerful. Law enforcement thoroughly inspected the area around the house and questioned the neighbors, hoping to get at least some lead about the missing Allison. But no witness had seen or heard anything. The only thing the investigators managed to find then was a few drops of blood in the woman's car and a strand of her hair in the trunk. Subsequently, the scale of the search for the missing woman expanded significantly. Rescuers, search groups, and volunteers came to the aid of the police. They combed the surrounding forests, checked wells, abandoned mines, and dams. Near the Baden-Clay house, they even set up a mannequin in women's clothing to recreate Allison's appearance in the last minutes before her disappearance. But the longer the search lasted, the less hope remained for the family to find the woman alive. Close friends of the family prayed incessantly, not wanting to even assume the worst. Gerard, overcome with grief, alternated between giving interviews to journalists and expressing hope for his wife's quick return home. At the same time, he contacted his mistress Tony, insisting that they should stop all communication for a while, to lay low. Meanwhile, Gerard continued to profess his love to the woman, assuring her that they would be together soon. 10 days had passed since Allison's disappearance. On April 30, 2012, a man, sailing in a boat, noticed a mutilated body on the riverbank. The gruesome discovery was made 13 kilometers from the Baden-Clay estate, under the Colo Bridge. And the very next day, Gerard went to the insurance company to find out what documents he needed to fill out in order to receive payment under his wife's policy. At the time of her disappearance, Allison's life was insured for $800,000 Australian dollars. A few more days passed. The medical examiner established that the mutilated corpse found under the bridge belonged to 43-year-old Allison Baden-Clay, who had disappeared 10 days earlier. Due to the advanced decomposition of the body, the exact cause of the woman's death could not be determined. She was wearing the same clothes she had left the house in, only her sweater was pulled up. Allison could only be identified thanks to dental records. Criminalists suggested that the woman had been strangled and classified her death as a murder. The funeral of Allison Baden-Clay took place on May 11, 2012, at St. Paul's Church. Gerard, in tears, comforted his daughters and supported the deceased's parents. Hundreds of people came to say goodbye to Allison. At the same time, Gerard continued to maintain contact with his mistress Tony, periodically calling her from a street payphone. He told the woman that something terrible had happened to his wife and asked her not to tell anyone about their secret relationship. Meanwhile, an intensive investigation into the murder of Allison Baden-Clay began. Her husband became the main suspect. Gerard maintained his position. Allegedly, at 10 in the evening, his wife had gone for her usual evening walk, and he had gone to bed. In the morning, when he woke up, he discovered that Allison had not returned home. However, the investigators uncovered interesting details. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, Gerard put his phone on charge, and at 5 in the morning, he was sitting at the computer, searching the internet for information about the right to remain silent. The medical examiner concluded that the scratches on the suspect's right cheek did not resemble shaving cuts but rather looked like marks from long female fingernails. At the same time, not a single drop of blood was found on Gerard's razor. As for the injuries on his chest, according to a biologist, there were no caterpillars capable of biting a person so abundantly in the area where the Baden-Clays lived. A botanist expert found fragments of 5 different plant species in the hair of the deceased Allison: eucalyptus, Chinese elm, myrtle, as well as leaves and thorns of the cat's claw vine and fishtail fern. Trees of the first 2 species, eucalyptus and Chinese elm, grew right under the bridge where the woman's mutilated body was found. Leaves and thorns of all 5 mentioned plant species were also found in the backyard of the Baden-Clay family's house. A month after the funeral, on June 13, 2012, 41-year-old Gerard Baden-Clay was officially charged with his wife's murder. The suspect was taken into custody. Gerard denied his guilt and intended to defend himself to the end. He asked to be released on bail but was immediately refused. the police feared that the man would flee. When, during the interrogation, the investigators called Tony and asked about the nature of her relationship with Gerard, the woman told the truth: their secret affair had been going on for 4 years already. And a few days before Allison's disappearance, the man had sent his mistress a letter in which he promised that they would be together by July 1st. The trial in the case of Allison Baden-Clay's death began in June 2014. The prosecution insisted that Gerard had killed his wife for the sake of an insurance payout, which would help him pay off his debts and start a new life with his mistress Toni McHugh. The prosecutor outlined his version of the events that could have occurred on the night of April 19 to 20, 2012. At 10 in the evening, Allison put her daughters to bed, after which she joined her husband in the living room. Together they watched television. At some point, a heated argument broke out between the spouses, during which Gerard attacked Allison with his fists, and the woman scratched his face. Forensic experts found someone's DNA under the nails of the deceased's left hand, but due to the significant damage to the biomaterial, they could not establish the person from whom it originated. The prosecutor argued that during the fight, Gerard strangled his wife and then dragged her lifeless body through the backyard. That's where leaves and thorns of local plants got tangled in the victim's hair. Later, the man shoved the dead Allison into the trunk of the car, took her to the river, and threw her under the bridge. The suspect allegedly hoped that after some time, the water level would rise, and the current would carry the body away in an unknown direction, then no one would ever find Allison. After committing the crime, Gerard returned to his home and put his phone on charge at 1:48 a.m. He cleaned up the house, and in the morning, he called the police and reported his wife missing. That same day, the suspect began looking for a lawyer specializing in criminal cases. And when Allison's body was found, before the official identification, he had already managed to visit the office of his new defense attorney. During the trial, Gerard continued to deny his guilt. He insisted that he would never leave his 3 little daughters home alone. He admitted that he had indeed had an argument with Allison that evening. According to the suspect, his offended wife ran away from home late in the evening. The man knew that the woman suffered from depression, so he thought, at the fatal moment, she had decided to end her life. However, Allison's parents and friends rejected such a possibility. They were convinced that she would never have resorted to suicide because she loved her girls above all else and took care of them. Her friends said they immediately suspected something was wrong because Gerard had always behaved too arrogantly and insincerely, considering himself superior to others. But Allison herself, due to her great love for her husband, did not notice his flaws. At the trial, excerpts from Allison's personal diary were made public. The woman wrote that the relationship with her husband had changed after the birth of their firstborn. Since then, she had felt lonely and almost never left the house. Gerard constantly controlled and humiliated her, forbade her to go outside, and could say something very cruel during arguments. He even eavesdropped on his wife's conversations through the baby monitor. He monitored Allison's expenses, deleted the numbers of her relatives from the contact list, and blocked their calls to the home phone. The woman's death prompted Gerard to try to obtain a substantial payout under the insurance policy. However, the company refused, freezing the money until a court decision was made. Another witness in the case, Melissa Romana, said that she had never met Gerard in person but had spoken with him several times by phone in 2009 regarding a real estate deal. When the deal was concluded, Gerard called the woman again. In a very serious voice, he said, "I have an interesting proposition for you. I need someone who would kill my wife." These words shocked Melissa, so she asked, "Why do you want her dead?" But Gerard did not answer. He abruptly changed the subject of the conversation, and soon said goodbye to the woman altogether, as it turned out, forever. On July 15, 2014, the court found Gerard Baden-Clay guilty and sentenced him to life imprisonment. However, there was a possibility of early release after 15 years. The very next year, 2015, the convict appealed the verdict. Then the servants of Themis decided that Alison's murder was not intentional and mitigated the punishment, reducing Gerard's prison term. This decision of the appellate court outraged the Australian public. Soon people took to the streets with protests and calls to overturn the ruling. About 4,000 people gathered to support the family of the deceased Alison. Finally, in 2016, the Supreme Court of Australia annulled the scandalous decision of the appellate instance and returned the original sentence to the murderer Gerard Baden-Clay, life imprisonment. Thus, the man will be able to apply for parole no earlier than 2027. It turned out that during the first year of imprisonment, Gerard behaved like an exemplary prisoner. But later, he began to feel at home behind bars and even committed a disciplinary offense. He allowed himself to grope a guard's buttocks. For this, the prisoner was severely reprimanded. In the correctional facility, Gerard befriended his cellmate, 73-year-old businessman millionaire John Chardon. The elderly man was also serving a sentence for the unintentional killing of his own wife. In addition, Gerard became friends with the Italian Massimo Sicca, who was convicted of a triple murder. The victims were his girlfriend, as well as her brother and sister. As for Gerard's former mistress, Toni McHugh, immediately after the end of the trial, she moved to the Indonesian island of Bali. There, the woman taught English and engaged in charity work. For years passed, and Toni relocated to the UAE, where she worked as a teacher again. Now, the former mistress of the convicted murderer lives very modestly and tries not to disclose information about her family. Keeping in touch with friends, she periodically logs into social networks from an anonymous account. Toni fears that Gerard will find her as soon as he is released. In her latest interview with journalists, the woman admitted that she had never wished Alison any harm and bitterly regrets everything that happened. From Toni, the public learned that Gerard had cheated on his wife not only with her but also with other women. The three orphan daughters of the deceased Alison, Hannah, Sarah, and Ella, were raised in the family of her parents and still live with their grandmother and grandfather. It is known that all the property of the tragically deceased mother, as well as the insurance payments received later, were transferred to the children. As of 2022, the eldest of the sisters, Hannah Baden-Clay, had already graduated from university. Like her late mother, the girl is passionate about dancing and pursues it professionally. Meanwhile, Alison's sister Vanessa founded a charitable organization aimed at combating domestic. Thank you for watching this story. Write your thoughts about it in the comments. Don't miss the future videos, subscribe and like the channel. Take care of yourself and people you love.